There's light for a look at the Savior, and life more abundant and free. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace.
Trick question. They're under siege, so
his word shall not fail you, he promised. Believe him and all will be well. Then go to a world that is dying, his perfect salvation to tell. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory, in the light of his glory. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace.
United States of America and its languages.
And the things
English
of
is
earth
predominant.
will grow strangely dim.
City of the world is Los Angeles.
Really?
Yes. Largest Spanish-speaking city in the world, Los Angeles. We have French spoken in Louisiana, up in Vermont, some places along the border with Quebec up there. Had a relative one time work for the Los Angeles Unified School District. Everything that the school district did had to run through 27 different languages, because that's how many languages were spoken at that time, and this was a number of years ago. Imagine all the notes going home and student handbooks and that kind of thing. That's why we have Google Translate. Hit the button and translate it. We'll get into some languages when we get down here a little farther. It says the book of Revelation shows us God's solution for our fallen world. In the final chapters, access to the tree of life is restored. The curse is lifted, and we are readmitted in the presence of God. Revelation, in some ways, is the book of Genesis in reverse. You ever think of Genesis, Revelation as the book of Genesis in reverse? I hadn't thought about it until I read it in here. Genesis starts off explaining the plan of salvation as it kind of funnels down to the end, and then Revelation kind of funnels down towards the salvation itself, you know, or maybe it's going the other way. One of the key issues in both Daniel and Revelation is worldly government, a succession of human attempts to control a planet that rightfully belongs to God, and who will, once this horrible episode of sin and rebellion is forever ended, ultimately rule in righteousness. So why do governments exist? What's the purpose of government?
To rule over and care for the people and give them what we want. We're supposed to vote.
So governments give us what we want?
Yeah, no. But what actually happens is
Not all governments.
that wasn't the purpose of government.
Well-
They didn't replace God.
Well, most governments have a constitution of some kind, a list of rules, laws that are supposed to direct their activities. Okay, supposed to. Although they get tweaked and massaged at times. But every government has a slightly different way of wanting to do things. I've been to China. They do things differently over there. People there are not the source of power. And you think with 1.5 billion of them, they'd be the source of power, but not so much. It's that Communist Party that makes the decisions that are fed down to the people, and the people have to comply. The United States were supposed to be a nation of the people, for the people, by the people, right? We feel sometimes it doesn't work that way. It's supposed to be that way. But each nation has its set of rules that at some point in their history they agreed upon and are currently enforcing so they can get certain things accomplished. And it comes down to the goals of that nation. What is the goal of the United States of America?
Promote democracy.
Sure, domestic tranquility.
Spread it out throughout the world currently, and if they don't like it, tough.
But we want to guarantee our rights.
Yes.
Okay, and we kind of like it if other people would guarantee their people those same rights. We could get into an argument of how much do we stick our nose into other people's business. I mean, we look at the United States, we came about because a group of people who were educated said, we're going to get together and we're going to fight this revolution and we're going to become independent from England. But when you impose that freedom upon people that didn't go through that process, maybe they're not ready to handle it yet. I'm thinking Afghanistan, okay? I'm thinking Iraq. Are they really ready to handle that level of responsibility? Or do you have to go through the Paul Reveres and the Davy Crockett's and the Daniel Boones and finally get to the point where you can handle that kind of stuff? I think we have to go through a certain process, and the United States went through this certain process to become what we are today. I think if you shortcut it, it doesn't work quite right. Now, when we get to God and setting up the world, what was his primary goal in the Garden of Eden? What was his goal? How was the government supposed to work at that level?
Supposed to be getting together, closer, fellowship. God just wanted fellowship and people to enjoy each other straight through.
So God wanted to commune with his creation.
Yes.
Had the Garden of Eden, the Tree of Life, and if things had worked out differently, Adam and Eve would have had children, taught them how to worship God, and they would have taught their kids how to worship God, and they would have continued out in that perfect world. Wouldn't it have been nice? But as you know, they were kicked out of the garden. And the garden was still there. There was the gates, I guess, to the garden, and they could go down there and look at the garden, but they couldn't go into the garden. Of course, the tree of life was not available.
They lost their privileges.
They lost all those privileges, yeah. They realized they were naked. I wonder how that worked. Hi, I'm naked all of a sudden, you know. Go grab some fig leaves. I understand that Adam and Eve would go to the garden, or the gates there, and make sacrifice, you know, worship God at that point, with the idea that, huh?
Where does it say that?
I think that's probably a Mrs. White kind of thing. I'm pretty sure probably something along that line. And it makes sense. If you were kicked out of your home and could only look at it, you'd almost make a shrine at that spot and say, okay, this is an important place. Home.
But we can't go there.
Yeah. What were
Like how the Jews today in Israel, they will pray at the Wailing Wall, the closest they can get to the Temple Mount where the temple used to be.
We see it where there's mass shootings. People bring flowers to a place and make a little shrine there, honoring that situation. So Adam and Eve were kicked out. What were Adam and Eve told to do in the Garden of Eden? What was there's basically three things that Adam and Eve were told that they needed to do.
Dress the garden.
Keep the garden, tend the garden,
And that's what he means.
God made animals. God instituted marriage, okay? God created the Sabbath, and God gave man his life work, tending and keeping the garden. I don't know what that was like in a perfect world. I would love to try to find out. I mean, what are weeds in the Garden of Eden?
No, there weren't any weeds.
What tending did they do? I wrap my mind and I can't imagine.
Fine to go wherever you wanted to.
That lasts for about a day. Then what do? Eat the fruit? That lasts for a few days. It's beyond my comprehension exactly what that meant, because I don't know what the Garden of Eden was really like. But I do know, again from some of Mrs. White's writings, that agriculture was supposed to be an important part of people's lives. She even says that agriculture is supposed to be the A, B, and C of the education offered in our schools. And guess what? It ain't. Guess what? Our schools are struggling. Is there a connection? Might be. Might be.
It blows my mind how.
There's a plant sale at the school next month. They have a garden now.
Really? How about that? Great.
They're teaching the older kids how to grow plants.
Good for them.
Yeah.
I struggled for years to get people's attention. It was hard. Pretty much impossible. So time goes on. And on Sunday's lesson, we talk about Nimrod and Nineveh. Now, Nimrod, when you hear that word, I always think of somebody being called a Nimrod. Kind of like an idiot. You're a Nimrod, you know, you dimwit. Who was Nimrod? He was a mighty man. What kind of mighty man was he? A bully? Explain. So he was not a true believer, but he was a mighty man. Does that sound positive or negative?
He was like a hunter. He was a warrior.
Hunter?
He was combative.
Okay. And so we have Nimrod, and he wasn't positive, but he's mentioned by name, so he must have been important for some reason, like a leader. Okay. It says in Sunday's lesson, outside of the garden, humans are required to work hard to provide for their own continued existence. Do you work hard for your continued existence? Well, some of us do. Some of us do. Most of us will have to work hard at something somewheres. Life became harder, and we had to live with pain and by the sweat of our brow. Our first parents trusted that the rightful king would provide a path back into the garden, and they brought sacrifices to the gates of Eden. In faithful anticipation of the redemption that God, right from the start, offered the fallen world. The Garden of Eden remained upon the earth long after man had become an outcast from its pleasant paths. Hither came Adam and sons to worship God. Here they renewed their vows of obedience to the law, the transgression of which had banished them from Eden. When the tide of iniquity overspread the world and wickedness of men determined their destruction by a flood of water, the hand that had planted Eden withdrew it from the earth. But in the final restitution, when there was a new heaven and a new earth, it will be restored more glorious, adorned than in the beginning. It's from Patriarchs and Prophets. So when the flood came, God took the garden, it says. Is that right? Let's talk about the flood just a little bit. In your mind's eye, how does that little movie clip unfold? For the flood. You've got Noah working for a long time with his sons to build an ark. The water comes, the animals come. Noah goes away, and so do the bad people in a different way. I try to wrap my mind around what we have now in the earth and what it must have been like before the flood. I mean, I look at places like the Grand Canyon. You ever been to the Grand Canyon? That's one big ditch. One big groove in the wall, in the floor, I tell you. And you see the mountains. I mean, we see some of them out here at snow-capped peaks all the time. We live in a great place. Those kind of things, I believe, were a result of the flood. But Mr. Bradley, I thought it took millions of years to make that Grand Canyon. Well, here's how I explain it to church kids. Not to the public school kids, but to the church kids. If you take a rock and analyze it, and it tells you it's 4 million years old, does that mean it's 4 million years old? Or does it mean it looks 4 million years old? See, God's really smart. He's really strong. He's really powerful. Can he not make that rock appear to be much older than it really is? I mean, think of the day of creation when he created the trees in the Garden of Eden. And he says, let there be these big trees. And there were big trees. And this tree was really tall. And had you cut it down, heaven forbid, in the Garden of Eden, and counted the rings, there might have been 100 rings or 1,000 rings. Yet it was just immediately made a moment ago. So, how old is that tree? It appears to be older than it really is. Okay? I think God gives us some of those quandaries to make us think a little bit harder about stuff, I think. Not all the answers are simple answers or easy answers. Maybe I'm taking it too lightly, but I know people have been pushed away from God by science. Because science has proven that, well, it can't have been 6,000 years ago. It had to be 1 million or 2 million or 1 billion years ago. And no, it didn't. My God is big. My God is mighty. There's nothing my God cannot do. Like the little kid's song goes. So why can't he make a tree or a rock look much older than it really is? So the flood comes. You know, I'd love to find the Noah's Ark, if it's still around. Some people think it is. Maybe it's on a mountain in Turkey. I've seen pictures in books that seem to indicate that this looks like an ark laying on the ground. Have you seen those? I got a theory. I don't know if it's true or not, just my theory. If I crawled out of an ark after being in there for a long time, and things hadn't really started to develop and grow very well again, maybe grass or shrubs, but not big trees for logs and stuff, I think I would have taken that ark apart and built my houses and built my towns and used it as something, a construction material. Whatever technology was in it, I would have taken it out and used it. And there's probably some technology in there that might astound us. Might astound us. I don't know what it would be like. But see, there's this kind of thing that runs through our thinking, I think, when we hear stories in Sabbath school as children, that, and maybe even it comes back from our caveman mentality that people have evolved from a lower level on up, that the people back then were really primitive and the people today are very advanced. Of course, that makes us all feel good about ourselves, doesn't it? We're so advanced. Could Noah have had access to technology that would even make us wonder how he did it?
Well,
Could he?
his own tools that he
How many windows were there in that ark? How did you get light way down into all those depths of that ark? But it was shut. And the food, and heating and cooling, and I think we're going to be surprised.
You know, the human race is deteriorating.
Yes.
In the opposite sense. Their brains were probably, we don't know how many times more advanced than we are. We deteriorated in size, physical size. We deteriorated in mental capacity.
And if it hadn't been for our industrial revolution, we would have all died at about age 40 with living in hovels. Yeah. Adam. One scientist I remember estimating that Adam could have easily been 12 feet tall. Easily. He would have had a stride when he was running that could have put him at over 100 miles an hour. With a brain that lasted for 800 or 900 years. I don't think he was inferior to me in any way. I think he was much more superior. And the things they could come up with in that length of life, well, we know God destroyed them because of why? They had come up with too many weird stuff. Continually evil thoughts and deeds and actions. I think God, when he took Noah in the ark, will be very similar to the last days when he comes and gets us. It'll be a rescue mission. Be a rescue mission. Had he not stopped it, there wouldn't have been anybody left to save. You think about our world today. Ever since I was a little kid, we've had these atomic bombs. And at least back during the Cold War, we used to hear about how many times you could destroy the whole world if we had a nuclear war. You know. I look at God coming the second time as a rescue mission to save us before we destroy ourselves completely. See, at the cross, it was proven that sin will kill God. Satan, sin, will kill God. In the last days, I think what we'll find out is that sin will kill itself. Sin is suicidal and self-destructive. So after the flood, Noah goes out. They start doing things. And if you read the genealogies of that time period, you'll find that with the length of lives and the way they overlapped, Noah wasn't that far out of contact with Adam. Not directly, but I know a guy that knows a guy, kind of thing. Family stories, yeah. And then when you get up to Abraham, well, he knew a guy that knew a guy, kind of thing. So stories from way back then with brains that were really good that could remember stuff could stay pretty accurate, couldn't they? They sure could.
Well, definitely Noah had to be different than what people are nowadays. And actually, when you read patriarchs and prophets, some of the wood that the ark was made out of was almost like stone. They must have been powerful people, but then who of us knows? Because they had just come from that, barely from the hand of the Creator. Their intelligence still had to be very high. They had many probably ways of doing things up today, and we think that we have intelligence. We probably have no idea of the way that they were able to do things. That before the flood, and even a short time afterwards, but man definitely decreased in intelligence, or we do not have the same brain power that Adam and Eve was created with, because of the years we've slowly lost a lot of it.
But when I was in Sabbath school, and they had us come up and put the little felts on the board, Noah was always a shepherd, wasn't he? And he always had some sheep, and when maybe he was an architect or an engineer or something, I don't know. He was smart enough and he was a good man, so who would God call on? Somebody capable of doing the job. Nineveh. What happened at Nineveh? What was that all about?
They were so bad, Jonah didn't want them saved.
Yeah, that was one.
So bad that he didn't want them saved.
How is Nimrod and Nineveh kind of connected? Let's go to this. I'll get this open here. Let me try this one. Sometimes my technology fails me. Here we go. That's not the one I wanted. Let's jump to the Tower of Babel. That had something to do with Nimrod and Nineveh, didn't it? When you get to the Tower of Babel, this was after the flood. And there's a problem with the language. The problem was they all spoke the same language, right? Why would that be a problem? I thought we're supposed to be able to communicate with each other, and doesn't that make things easier when you can talk with each other? And well, it can, but yes.
That caused the problem in the first place. They were all able to get their heads together to come up with all kinds of things.
So,
And God did that to just one to confound them.
so communication is evil, or it can be evil.
The way it was used.
Okay. Well, how were they using it? What were they trying to do to be evil?
Circumvent what God had told them.
Now, God had said, what about the flood? I will never again destroy you by a flood. I might destroy you by something else, but not the flood. Did they believe him? Apparently not. Apparently not. Because they tried to build a tower, the Tower of Babel, And what was the purpose of the Tower of Babel? I mean, try to think through the logic of that. You're trying to get above a flood. If you go to the top of it, somehow you're safe from a God that can destroy a whole planet. I mean, it comes down to their understanding of God was not very good, was it? They kind of knew God, but they really didn't understand him too much. And who was going to be saved at the top of this tower? Everybody? Or just the king? Ones that get to the top first? The logic doesn't work in my head too well on this. If you was going back and advising these people, you say, well, wait a minute. What's this going to really accomplish here?
It seemed like they would realize if the flood was moving back and forth, then it would undermine all of this down at the bottom, and they'd all fall.
And if God can make the water come up this high, can't he make it come up this high or higher? You know, that's the part that defies logic.
There's a lot of water stays up there for a year.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how high you are.
You'd almost think that it would have been better to put their energy into building an ark that would float than to build a tower. Of course, then God still would have confused the languages, possibly anyway. But that was God's goal. He didn't want them to do this tower. Not that it would work, but it was stupid. And they were being stupid and they were being sinful.
But on the other hand, maybe they felt that a tower was better because basically, if you read, like I said before, patriarchs and prophets, the water was so turbulent that actually angels helped the ark because even it says that the animals were roaring because it was not a smooth ride.
Yeah.
For people on the ark.
Did the ark save Noah or did God save Noah? That's the bottom line, yeah. So an ark wouldn't have helped the Tower of Babel people much, would it? Because if you're not on God's side, you're against them.
They were just being bad.
Have you noticed that evil people don't think right? I mean, they just really don't think right. Look around the world today at people that you consider evil. Are they logical, reasonable, rational people? Or are they kind of kooks on some level? And I think there's a reason for this. I'm being kind of silly with it, but I think something else that fits into the last day kind of events. In the last days, what's going to happen to God's Spirit on earth?
That's all that needs to happen to destroy the earth, is that God does not need to destroy the earth, he just pulls it back.
He pulls his power back, his protective power back. What does that do to the natural elements? Well, they go out of whack. What does that do to the human brain and thinking when God's Spirit is withdrawn from people? I'd submit for your thinking it's insanity. And I think what we're seeing now, I say it, but a lot of things in the world, when you hear people think, the way they think about stuff, I'm thinking, they're losing something. They're really losing something. Or is that because that Spirit's being withdrawn slowly? Kind of warning us? Okay. Something to consider. Something to consider. Abraham. Well, before we leave Tower of Babel, we've got to talk about languages. You ever been in a situation where you don't understand anything somebody's saying? Maybe you've been on a trip someplace and you're dealing with some group of people and they just don't understand what you're talking about because they speak another language? It's kind of disconcerting, isn't it? I had the opportunity to have 3 vertebrae fused in a hospital in Taiwan. And it is a weird experience to come out of anesthesia and everybody speaking Chinese. It's weird. It takes a moment there for you to get your bearings, Where am I? What's happening? But can you imagine people working on a structure of any project, and all of a sudden you don't understand what the next person's saying? And there's no Google Translate to do anything for you. You know. When you study languages, you find that there's families of languages. And one thing about languages is all the ones we have nowadays have evolved from something else. There's very few really basic original languages. They've all had time to kind of shift and change with time. You have Romance languages like French and Spanish and Italian. Then you have your Germanic languages and your Uralic languages and all these different kinds. And you look at a place like the United Nations, how do they get along? Well, to be in the United Nations, you notice these guys will have headphones on. They're listening to whatever's happening in their own language. And there's people back in rooms that are doing nothing but translating stuff. Maybe AI is starting to help out with that, I don't know. But it used to be that every translator had to be perfectly fluent in 3 languages, English and then 2 others, so they could kind of tell the people down there listening exactly what was happening. Our Tower of Babel people didn't have that advantage, so they went off and kind of built their own societies based upon their common language. And then eventually it evolved into what we have today. How the world looked back in those days, I don't know. You kind of think in your mind, how did the Native Americans get to America? How did the Chinese end up in China and the Africans and Europeans? And when they talk about the time of Nimrod, they talked about in a day when the world was divided, okay? And divided could be just kind of divvying things up. You get this place, you get that place. Some people think, well, maybe that's some geographical thing like the continental drift theory, you know. I don't know. It doesn't matter, really. We do know that people got everywhere. We know that Christopher Columbus was the first one to come to America, right? Except for all those millions of Native Americans that got here somehow. Of course, in school we were told they came across a land bridge from Siberia over to Alaska, and then they came down. But then for some reason they didn't make the big civilizations till they got all the way to Mexico and South America. There's other stories that could explain that. So Abraham. Why is Abraham such an important person in the Bible? Or maybe another way to ask it is, why did God choose Abraham? It seemed like he had a natural, native, instinctual belief in God. So God didn't have to take him from pagan to believer. You see, all the way through time, there's always been somebody that's been faithful. I mean, Noah was faithful, and people all down through the history. There's always been somebody that's had that knowledge of God. I think God nurtures that. And at this point in time, he called Abraham to become the father of a nation. Father of a nation. And that nation was going to have a special job. What was that job? To eventually crucify Christ? No, not really. Maybe, I don't know. It's hard to tell about some of these things. See, Abraham had sons and sons and sons and down the line, and they eventually became a nation, a group of people, same language, same religion, hopefully. But wasn't God's notion that he wanted to be able to reach the world with the gospel? Okay, isn't that the underlying? And the gospel being the true knowledge of the true God, which is a saving knowledge. So Abraham was going to be the father of this nation that was to help save the world, which interestingly enough, he did, but not in the way that it started out. The question I have is, God, knowing the beginning from the end and being really, really, really smart, didn't he know things weren't going to work out the way they work out very well? Didn't he know that Israel was going to really mess up and have to be taken over by the Babylonians and apostatize?
He worked with humans and allowed them the autonomy to choose between good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
He worked around the circumstances and did his best to draw humans back to him.
I guess if we can reverse engineer it and say, had Abraham not been chosen, had his descendants not become a nation, had that nation not apostatized and were stupid a lot, they would not have been in a place to crucify Christ, who ended up being the Savior of the world. See how it kind of works? So you kind of wonder, what was the exact purpose? I think originally, or at least theoretically, the nation of Israel was not going to be a big nation. It was going to be a small nation, plunked right down there in the Middle East. And if you look at history, how things have come and gone through the Middle East, that was exactly on the crossroads for everything. It doesn't matter if you're Romans coming down, Egyptians coming up, Greeks coming. It was right where everybody did their stuff. It would have been a trade route, on a trade routes. And it would have been like a truck stop where you could stop and learn about God. People coming through there would have said, well, what kind of God do you have here? You must have a mighty king. Well, we don't have a king. At least that was the plan, not to have a king. And we don't have a king. We have a God. Well, show us the statue of this God. Well, we don't have a statue of this God. He just lives with us in our hearts. Yeah. And then that would allow these nations to take the gospel, the knowledge of the true God, back to all their different places. But that didn't work out, did it? But interestingly enough, because Jesus was in the Holy Land and was crucified there, and Christians started out there, they were still on that crossroads to every place else. So really the goal was accomplished, wasn't it? See, God doesn't make mistakes. That's what we do. And sometimes God's got to tweak his plans based on our mistakes or our cooperation. So the kings of Tuesday's lesson, it talks about the kings of Israel, kings of what reason did God give for telling the people, you don't really want a king? Because they said, we want a king. He says, are you sure you want a king? Don't you know that kings are going to be this way, this way, this way, this way, that way, and that's not going to be a good thing? He did. And what happened? Exactly what God said. Some of the kings of Israel turned out to be worse than any of their pagan counterparts. And you kind of wonder, why did God allow that? Well, it taught us something important, I think. Do you really want a king? If that's the way it's going to turn out? Probably not. Probably not. And sometimes in our own lives, especially in our Adventist church, do we really want a king? You say, well, we don't have a king. Think about it. How much political speech can we do at the church here? Very little. Why? Because we lose our tax-exempt status. If we were willing to lose our tax-exempt status, maybe we could say things, maybe. How about our Adventist schools? Are we following the state? Maybe too much? Why do we go to school exactly the same number of days that the public school goes? Maybe we should determine that we need to go 10 days longer, 50 days longer, or whatever, 20. Okay? How about the curriculum? Do we have total control in our Adventist schools about the curriculum that we give? Yeah, to a point. But the state's looking over our shoulder. My theory is this. The secular powers should be coming to the Adventist church and saying, how can we do our job better? How can we run our state better? How could we run our school systems better? Because you guys are doing such a wonderful job. You know what I'm saying? I think God gives us information, opens up things. Hi. I think God gives us information for reasons. Didn't he tell the Adventists years before tobacco was a bad thing that tobacco was a bad thing? Had we proclaimed that loud and clear, what would they think about other things that we said? When the words of the prophet come to pass? You know what I'm saying? I think God gives us visions, information that properly implemented would bring more glory to Him, would bring more attention to His salvation, save more people. Or maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Is there anything else we need to talk about here? I heard the first bell. I think it was just one. So how should all this affect your thinking and your doing? How should this affect the way you look at God and the way He does things? I guess we have the benefit of hindsight to be able to say, well, God knew exactly what He was doing with Noah. He knew exactly what He was doing at the Tower of Babel kind of time. He knew exactly what He was doing with Adam and Eve. He knew exactly what He was doing with Abraham. So why would we question that He doesn't know what He's doing now? He's doing exactly what He should be doing now. That's what God does. He does the right thing. Our question is do we want to follow that right thing? Do we represent God's will? And I think we'll leave it there for the day. And maybe we think about that as we go along. Are we following God's will? When we are, things work out pretty good. When we don't, not so much. Let's have prayer. Heavenly Father, help us to understand things more. Please come into our minds and help enlighten us to the ways we should go, what we should say, what we should do, so that more glory is brought to you and more salvation is brought to your children that may not have it at the moment. We thank you, Lord. Amen. Have a good Sabbath.